In a basement lab at Johns Hopkins, a man named Kurt Richter is filling a gas cylinder with warm water. He is in his 60s, he has thinning hair, a thin mouth, and has decided against his better judgment to ask a question that no decent scientist asks out loud. The question is this: how long does it take a living thing to give up? Some rats swim for 15 minutes, some for 8, some die in 2. Richter will examine the bodies afterward, and he will not describe the deaths as ordinary drowning. What he keeps finding is stranger. The heart has slowed, dilated, and stopped in a pattern that he thinks looks like sudden death. This is a story about hope. No, not the hope that we find on greeting cards or in pop songs. The other one, the one philosophers have been arguing about for 2,500 years. The one that has killed people and saved people and that we still in 2026 do not entirely understand. By the end of this video, you will know why some rats died in minutes while others kept swimming for days. You will know why the Optimists died first in a Vietnamese prison camp. You will know what was actually left at the bottom of Pandora's jar and why some philosophers think it was the worst thing in there. And you will know, I think, something uncomfortable about your own mind. Kurt Richter was not trying to be cruel. He was trying to understand something that had haunted medicine since the war. The case of people who, under extreme stress, seemed to die when injury alone did not explain the death. Later writers would call related states give-up-itis. Richter used a colder phrase: sudden death. Richter wanted to know if this was a real biological event or just a story doctors told themselves when they could not explain a death. So he went to the basement. He took wild Norway rats, the kind that you find in alleys and the ones that bite, and put them one at a time into glass jars of warm water, deep enough that they could not touch the bottom. He timed how long they swam. Many of the fiercest wild rats died first, some within minutes. None of that group survived longer than 15. But here is where the experiment becomes strange. Then Richter changed the history of the animal before the final swim. Some rats were handled, some were clipped, some were repeatedly placed in water and then rescued before death. Those rats learned that the jar was not always final. After that conditioning, the results changed completely. Some rats swam not for minutes but for hours. Some swam for days. 60 hours was no longer impossible. 2.5 days of paddling in a glass tube by animals that otherwise might have died almost immediately. Well, what changed? The water was not magic, the jar was still a jar, the animal still could not touch the bottom. The only thing that changed was the animal's past experience. It now possessed a single piece of information that sometimes hands come. Richter wrote it down in plain English in psychosomatic medicine. He used a word scientists were not supposed to use for a rat. The word was hope. He wrote, "After elimination of the hopelessness, the rats do not die." And this remains one of the most strangest sentences in the paper. 10 years later, in a psychology lab in Pennsylvania, a graduate student named Martin Seligman was about to discover the inverse of Richter's finding, and by accident, one of the darkest mechanisms in the human mind. Seligman had 3 groups of dogs. The first group sat in a harness for a while, then went home. Nothing happened to them. They were the control group. The second group received electric shocks, but each dog in this group had a panel near its nose. If it pressed the panel, the shock stopped. The dog learned this quickly. The shocks became something the dog could do something about. The third group, however, was the cruelty of this experiment, although Seligman did not yet know it. Each dog in the third group was wired to a dog in the second group. Whenever a group 2 dog received a shock, its partner in group 3 got the same shock, same intensity, same duration, but there was no panel. There was nothing the group 3 dog could press, push, bite, or do to make the pain stop. The shock came when it came and ended when it ended, and nothing the dog did mattered. Then the next day, Seligman moved every dog into a new box. This new box had 2 sides. One side gave a mild shock, the other side did not. Between them was a barrier so low that any dog could step over without effort. The dogs from group 1, the unharmed ones, felt the shock and immediately jumped to the other side. The dogs from group 2, the ones who had learned that pressing things stopped pain, also jumped, very quickly. The dogs from group 3 did not jump. They laid down on the electrified floor. They did not test the air. They did not look around. They did not approach the barrier they could have stepped over with one paw. They simply lay there in pain that they could have ended in 2 seconds, and they whimpered. Seligman called what he had created learned helplessness. But what he had really discovered was the inverse of Richter's rats. Richter had shown that prior rescue could change how long an animal kept struggling. Seligman, on the other hand, showed that uncontrollable pain could teach an animal not to try, even when escape was one paw away. The animal does not see the open door. Now let's rewind to the winter of 1944. In a Nazi concentration camp, a young Austrian psychiatrist watched something he could not explain. His name was Viktor Frankl. The death rate in the camp had a rhythm to it that did not match the rhythm of violence alone. Yes, men were dying from beatings, starvation, disease, and exposure, but Frankl noticed another pattern. After a wave of hope failed, the body seemed to follow the mind downward. Like in the week between Christmas and New Year's, Frankl asked the older prisoners about it, and they had a theory. Each autumn, the camp filled with rumors. The Allies were winning, the war was almost over, liberation was coming soon, coming by Christmas. Men held this date in their heads, they walked into the snow with it. They survived the typhus with it, they were beaten with it inside their mouths, and they did not lose it. Then Christmas arrived, and the gates did not open. The men whose entire architecture of survival had been a date were now standing inside a date that had already passed. In the days that followed, Frankl wrote, debts increased. Frankl even wrote about this later in a book that has now sold more than 16 million copies. He did not reduce survival to strength. Again and again, he returned to meaning, a person, a task, a future responsibility, something that could outlive a date on a calendar. 21 years later, a US Navy officer named James Stockdale was shot down over North Vietnam and spent the next 7.5 years as a prisoner of war. Much of that time was in Hao Lo prison, the place American prisoners grimly nicknamed the Hanoi Hilton. He was tortured many times. He was held in leg irons for 2 years. He discovered his own face to make himself unfit for propaganda. When he came home, decades later, a writer named Jim Collins asked him a question that nobody had thought to ask. Who did not make it out? Stockdale did not hesitate. Oh, that's easy. The Optimists, the one who said, we are going to be out by Christmas. Christmas would come and Christmas would go. Then they would say, we are going to be out by Easter. And Easter would come and Easter would go. And then Thanksgiving. And then it would be Christmas again. And they died of a broken heart. The optimists died first. The men who survived, Stockdale said, were the ones who did two things at once that did not seem like they could fit inside the same skull. They never lost faith that they would prevail in the end, and they confronted every morning the most brutal facts of where they actually were. This is now called the Stockdale paradox, and it is quietly one of the most disturbing ideas in modern leadership psychology because it suggests that the wrong kind of hope is more dangerous than no hope at all. A hope with a calendar attached to it is a weapon you carry against yourself. Now let's go back further, much further, past Frankl, past Richter, past the Roman Empire, past the Greek city-states, into the part of human memory that is so old it only survives in stories. Around 700 BC, a Greek farmer poet named Hesiod wrote down a myth about why human life is the way it is. The first woman, he said, was made by the gods as a punishment. Her name was Pandora. In Hesiod's version, she came connected to a sealed jar, a pythos that should have not been opened. And she opened it. Out of the jar came the miseries of human life, sickness, toil, and the thousand griefs that had not burdened mortals before. They scattered across the world and have not been recaptured since. But when Pandora finally slammed the lid back on, one thing was still inside. The Greek word for it was elpis. For 2,000 years, scholars have argued about what elpis means. The popular translation is hope. The optimistic reading of it is that the gods in their last mercy left humanity one good thing inside the jar to balance all the other evils. It was hope. Hope was the antidote. But this Greek word is not simple. A second school of translators reads elpis as not modern optimism, but as expectation, of waiting towards the future that may be true, may be false, may be merciful, or may be deceptive. On this reading, hope was not necessarily the antidote in the jar. It may have been the last evil. The thing Zeus held back so that humans, having released the others, would keep going through them. Friedrich Nietzsche understood the myth this way. Zeus did not want men, however much he might be tormented by the other evils, to fling away his life, but to go on letting himself be tormented again and again. For that, he gives man hope. In reality, it is the most evil of evils because it prolongs man's torment. And Spinoza, the Dutch philosopher who tried to write the laws of human emotion, went further. He argued in his Ethics that hope and fear are not two emotions. They are one emotion, looked at from two sides. You cannot hope for something without in the same instant fearing it will not arrive. You cannot fear something without in the same instant secretly hoping it will not happen. Spinoza argued that they are the front and back of a single coin. Fear cannot be without hope, nor hope without fear. For Spinoza, both were passions, things that happen to you, not things you do. And both belong to a mind still dependent on uncertainty. The freer mind for Spinoza would try to live less by hope and fear and more by understanding. Then Albert Camus, 250 years later, was even more severe towards certain kinds of hope. He looked at the human situation, a brief conscious life surrounded by a universe that does not answer questions, and called some escapes from the absurd philosophical suicide, which is like the decision to invent a final meaning that makes the present pain come out right. To Camus, the honest response was to live anyway without pretending the universe had promised a rescue, like Sisyphus pushing the stone up the hill knowing it will roll back and finding the strength to push it anyway. Now you may be wondering, don't all these views on the word hope go against each other? Don't they contradict each other? Was hope in the jar the antidote to evil? Or was it the final evil, the one that keeps you alive long enough to suffer the others? Because here is the strange thing, the lab data when you look at it does not pick a side. Because didn't Richter's rats live after and because of the removal of hopelessness? But at the same time, Frankl's prisoners suffered when a fixed hope collapsed. While Stockdale survived with faith in the end, but without trusting the next promised date. How can the same word point towards endurance in one case and collapse in another? The answer, when it finally arrives, is going to come from a man named Snyder in a small office in Kansas in 1991. See, for most of human history, we treated hope the same way we treated weather. Either it was present or it was not. You looked up at the sky of your own mind and you reported the conditions. But Charles Snyder, an American psychologist, did not believe this. In the early 1990s, Snyder proposed something that sounds simple, but it's not. He said hope is not just a feeling. Hope is a cognitive structure organized around goals. It is something the mind builds, not something the heart simply receives. And it has, he argued, two essential moving parts. And if either one is missing, what you have is not durable hope. It is something else wearing hope's clothes. The first component he called pathways. Pathways are the ability to look at where you are and where you want to be, and to see routes between them. Plural, a high hope person when one road closes sees three more. A low hope person, on the other hand, sees a wall. The second component he called agency. Agency is the belief that you, specifically, can walk one of those roads. Not that someone might, not that someone should, but that you will walk one of those roads. A person with pathways but no agency is a planner who cannot move. A person with agency but no pathways is a fighter who cannot find the door. Hope is the rare configuration in which both are present at the same time. Now let's look back at the experiments with this definition in mind. Richter's conditioned rats had something like agency restored when they were saved, or at least that is the human translation of the behavior. Their past had taught them that continued struggle might still be followed by rescue, so they swam. Seligman's helpless dogs had learned that action did not matter, so even when the pathway was right in front of them, the low barrier, the safe side, many did not use it. So pathways without agency are not effective. On the other hand, Frankl's prisoners with a Christmas date in their mind had pathways. They had liberation, but their agency was outsourced. It depended entirely on a thing they could not influence, the timing of an army. So when that date passed, both halves of hope collapsed at once. While Stockdale survivors built hope inside themselves, their pathway was not a date. Their pathway was who I will be when I leave. Their agency was what I will refuse to do today. And these were the things the prison could not take because the prison did not know they existed. So Snyder's model gives us a vocabulary for what these stories keep circling. There is one kind of hope that opens routes and restores action, and then there's another kind of hope that narrows into one brittle expectation. And the neuroscience went one step further and showed us that the expectation is not merely an idea. When a human being expects relief, expects rescue, expects healing, a future, then the networks involving the prefrontal cortex, the periaqueductal gray, endogenous opioids, dopamine, and the reward circuitry can change the way pain is felt. This is known as the placebo response, and it is not, as we used to assume, imagined relief. It is real relief manufactured by the brain on the basis of expectation. In other words, expectation can change the body. Pain can decrease, stress physiology can shift. This expectation of relief is not the same as relief from the outside world, but it can become part of how relief is produced inside the body. In patients with prefrontal deterioration, including some patients with Alzheimer's disease, placebo analgesia may be reduced or disrupted. The brain's ability to use expectation against pain can weaken. Hope is not an organ, but it does have machinery, and that machinery can fail. Richter's rats were not proving that rodents write philosophy in their heads. They were showing something narrower and more useful, that in mammals, prior control, prior rescue, and prior defeat can change what the body does under stress. Now let me bring you back to the bucket, to Kurt Richter, to 1957, to the basement, the glass cylinder. The rats are swimming, its stroke gets weaker, it begins to sink. Then the hand comes in, it lifts the rat, it holds the rat, it returns the rat to the world, and later when the rat meets the water again, its body does not read the jar the same way. And there's something we have not said yet about this experiment, and I want to say it now because it is the only thing in the whole video that I actually think quite matters. The variable in this was not hope, the variable was a pair of human hands. The rats in this experiment did not develop hope by reading a book, they did not develop hope by adopting a philosophy, they did not generate the new pattern from language. Whatever changed in it was installed by experience. An external party briefly intervened, asking nothing, lifted, and then let go. This is, I suspect, the only honest answer to the question this video has been chasing. Hope is not always a substance you manufacture by yourself. The German philosopher Ernst Bloch, writing in exile from the Nazis in the 1930s and later developing the work that became the principle of hope, called hope a not yet, a horizon, an unfinished tense, the part of being that has not yet become. For Bloch, hope was not passive wishing, it was a way of orienting life towards real possibility. And Kierkegaard, writing 100 years before Bloch, treated possibility as essential to the self. Despair for him was not merely the absence of feeling, it was a broken relationship between the self and what it might become. To hope in this register is to refuse to abandon the possible. But you cannot refuse to abandon yourself if there is no one in the room who reminds you that you exist. This, finally, is what the experiments share. Richter's rats had a history of rescue. Frankl's survivors had a person, a wife, an unborn child, a manuscript. Stockdale had a code tapped through prison walls in the system that guards could not read. Seligman's helpless dogs had nothing and they could not move. Hope is not optimism. Optimism is a belief about the world. Hope is a relationship between a future, a route, and someone or something that keeps the route visible. You can be given hope by another person, even briefly the way the rats in the Richter's experiment were given a different history. You can give hope to another person the way the hands changed the meaning of the water. And when neither happens, when no one comes and no one is reached for, what is left is the second box, the one with the open door and an animal that does not see it. If you are watching this at 3 in the morning in a year that has not gone the way you wanted and a body that is tired in a way you do not know how to name, the thing left in the jar was not a feeling. It was the possibility that eventually, somewhere, a hand might come in. And it is also the possibility that the hand might be yours reaching into someone else's water. That is one way to hear Elpis. The Greeks were not simple optimists, and Nietzsche was not simply wrong, and Camus was not simply wrong. Hope, when it shrinks into a single promised outcome, can become an evil. It is a date on a calendar that does not come. It is the optimist in Hua Lo dying of an unmet Christmas. But hope with a route, hope with agency, hope held by a second pair of hands until the first pair can hold it again, that is the thing Richter was reaching for when he used the word. Hope is one of those things we can measure that can keep a conscious thing alive in conditions that should kill it. And as Richter's wrote, after elimination of the hopelessness, the rats do not die. So if this video held you, the kindest thing you can do is send it to one person, not the algorithm, but to a person by a name. And be the hand that helps restore hope in that someone's life. And you can use those same hands to tap the like button, click the subscribe button to bring some of that hope back into this channel's life. Thank you.